IKKO IKKI, Masters of Rebellion, or at least they are in my eyes. The only clan in the game to have access to the Jodo Shinzu Buddhism religion, which gives them a unit roster that is almost entirely unique to their clan. Hi, my name is MrSmartDonkey, and today we're going to be taking a look at the ins and outs of one of my favourite Shogun 2 clans, the IKKO IKKI. As always, we will start off with the IKKO IKKI clan traits. The game classes them as Masters of Faith, which is interesting since they're not the only clan in the game heavily focused on faith. I'm of course talking about the Yasugi, but we'll get to them in a different video. The first thing that differentiates the IKKO IKKI from most other clans is their 2 starting provinces rather than 1. They're not the only clan in the game to start with 2, but it's still noteworthy. Looking at their traits, we can see that the IKKO IKKI cannot train Metsuke. This is a pretty big negative trait. I tend to use my Metsukes purely for economy, so not having them making me thousands of koku every turn is a big downside. Next up we have the generals can convert provinces to the IKKO faith trait. What this means is that all your generals start with the True Believer trait, giving them +1 religious zeal. Your Daimyo starts with the Fanatic trait, giving him +2 religious zeal. More on that later, however. The final 2 traits have to do with the IKKO IKKI's units. Can recruit large units of Ashigaru, weak but with high morale, gives each of their regular Ashigaru units an extra 40 men in their units, meaning Yari Ashigaru go from 200 to 240, and bow and matchlock Ashigaru go from 160 to 200. This is important since it's a flat number rather than a percentage, meaning that the size growth is technically more useful on the bow and matchlock Ashigaru than it is on the Yari Ashigaru. The units also become slightly weaker in favour of having more morale, but we'll go into more detail on that later. Last but not least is the Can't Recruit Superior Warrior Monks trait, which is the standard minor upgrade to the mentioned units, similar to the Superior Katana Samurai for the Shimazu. Let us move on to the next topic, the campaign. The IKKO IKKI possibly have the best starting regions in the game. Both Artisans as well as Kaga are amazing in several ways. Starting with the economic side of things, your capital Artisan has both fertile soil as well as a coastal village, but that is not all. It also starts with the Artisans building, which gives you not only more wealth, but also one of the most valuable trade resources in the game. Artisan alone would have made for a great starting region, but it gets better. Kaga doesn't have a coastal village, but it does have very fertile soil, meaning you are in an incredibly strong economic position coming into the campaign. Militarily you start off very strong as well, having both the Artisans for your ranged units and a blacksmith for your melee units. To top this all off, the IKKO IKKI are the only faction in the game to field the Longsword Ashigaru unit, an extremely powerful early game unit against the AI, which has a 33% lower upkeep than your Yari Ashigaru, costing only 61 koku a turn on legendary. More on the actual unit later, but it was worth mentioning on the subject of early game campaign. You also start with a monk already out in the field, meaning you can start spreading your religion to the places you aim on taking next. On that subject, let's go over your neighbours. To your west in Wakaza are the Sakai, not a particularly valuable province, but it can form a decent choke point. To the south lies Omi, owned by the SI. I talked about this region in my Hattori video, but to reiterate, it's a valuable economic province, but it's especially dangerous to take early on as the IKKO IKKI, as it leaves you vulnerable from several angles. To your east lies Etchu, owned by the Jinbo, an unremarkable region. The Jinbo are unlikely to declare war on you due to their defensive nature. Finally, to your northeast lies Noto, owned by the Maite Hatakeyama, the strongest faction in the game at the start. The IKKO IKKI's expansion options are quite clear. You either go east, or you go west. Both your provinces are natural choke points, so you're able to defend yourself quite well no matter which way you choose. The first mission you'll get is to convert the majority of Omi to your religion, thereby telling you that Omi should be your first target, but it's also the most dangerous. What I ended up doing in my campaign is going west, but instead of taking territories I made vassals and forged alliances, most notably with the Oda. If you can maintain your relationship, you can freely go east knowing you will be secure in the west, with the Oda being one of the strongest factions in the game early on. Instead of straight up going east, you may also consider building a small navy and landing an army on the island of Seido, owned by the Honma. This island has a gold mine, which will help you a lot financially over the course of your campaign. It also gives you an army behind the Yasuji's lines, a clan you will likely come into conflict with early on. Do bear in mind the Honma are allied to the Hatakeyama, but going to war with them as the IKKO IKKI isn't too big a deal, since you'll be easily take Noto off their hands, and you're not too close to any of their other regions. Next up, a quick peek at the IKKO IKKI family tree. Your 29-year-old Daimyo Shimozuma Jutsurai starts off with a whopping 3 traits. Fanatic, as we mentioned earlier, gives him +2 religious zeal, meaning you'll be converting provinces to the IKKO faith just by being in them, similar to a monk. This Trustful gives him a -5% chance of being assassinated. Lastly, Casually Brutal gives him a +1 repression to the province he is in. Your second general is a 34-year-old car company with the True Believer trait, which as mentioned before gives him +1 religious zeal, a slightly worse version of the trait your Daimyo has. You have an 8-year-old son as your sole kid, so nothing too special there. Finally, a quick peek at the Mastery of the Arts. The IKKO IKKI tree is mostly the same as the standard tree, except for a few minor things. Since there's no Metsukes for the IKKO IKKI, the Secret Police art has been removed and the Sword Hunt art has been changed. Also, their left side of the Way of Chi has seen a few changes, mostly making it easier to obtain your late game warrior monk units. Moving on to the IKKO IKKI specific units, of which there are a lot. I'm gonna divide them into two categories. The first category holds units that have received changes from their vanilla counterpart, and the second category will be units that are entirely unique to the IKKO IKKI. Starting with the former category, which consists of Yari Ashigaru, Bow Ashigaru, Matchlock Ashigaru, Naginata warrior monks, Bow warrior monks, and the Naginata warrior monk hero. In order to save some time, I'm gonna rapid fire through this category, so hold on to your seats. IKKO IKKI Yari Ashigaru are weaker than their vanilla counterparts in the early game, but stronger when they've gained some experience due to their lower starting stats fading in comparison to their total stats, while still having an extra 40 men. IKKO IKKI Bow Ashigaru surprisingly start out stronger than their vanilla counterparts despite their horrible stats, and remain stronger when experience gets thrown in the mix. Small side note, IKKO IKKI Bow Ashigaru do have a 25% higher upkeep cost than their vanilla counterpart. IKKO IKKI Matchlock Ashigaru start out weaker than their vanilla counterpart and remain so even when experience comes into play. Then again, Matchlock Ashigaru are pretty bad anyway, so you wouldn't want to use them regardless, especially since the Fire by Rank ability is broken. The IKKO IKKI Naginata warrior monks, IKKO IKKI Bow warrior monks, and IKKO IKKI Naginata warrior monk hero units all have a slight boost in stats over their vanilla counterparts. Unlike the Shimazu and many other clans however, the upkeep isn't reduced for these units. However, the IKKO IKKI Naginata warrior monks are easier to obtain in the campaign than their vanilla counterpart, because you only need the first tier of your religious temple to recruit them, whereas the vanilla Naginata warrior monks require the second tier. Moving on to the second category, units that are entirely unique to the IKKO IKKI. First up are the IKKO IKKI Lone Sword Ashigaru, the only Sword Ashigaru unit in the game. You could say the Moriwaka Raiders are Ashigaru tier 2, but they still require several buildings to be recruited, while IKKO IKKI Lone Sword Ashigaru can be recruited from the get-go. Needless to say, they will demolish Yari Ashigaru out of Yari Wall, and since that is the only other melee infantry unit you'll come up against in the early game, they'll have an easy time. Similar to Yari Ashigaru in Yari Wall, they can also take on Yari Samurai and win with ease. As I mentioned earlier, their upkeep is really low, so you'll want to field many of them early on, just be careful of enemy cavalry. Next up are the Yari Ronin, Katana Ronin, and Bow Ronin units, which once again to save time I shall cover fairly quickly. Important to note is that there is no Naginata Ronin unit. All Ronin units have slightly higher stats than their Samurai counterparts at the cost of a lower unit size. Yari Ronin have 40 men less than Yari Samurai but will actually come out on top in a 1v1. They do miss the rapid advance ability however. Since there's no Naginata Ronin units, you might actually have to rely on these for your anti-cav units though, which means not having rapid advance is actually a big miss. Katana Ronin also have 40 men less than Katana Samurai, and they get absolutely destroyed by their Samurai counterpart, there's no two ways about it. Bow Ronin only have 20 men less than both Samurai, but they also lose their 1v1 against their Samurai counterparts. Not by much however, so feel free to field them. However, since your Bow Warrior monks are some of the best archers in the game, I advise you to go straight for them instead. Next up are the IKKO IKKI Marathon monks, not entirely unique to the IKKO IKKI as the Yasuji has access to them as well, but they're the only other clan. Their closest comparison are Naginata warrior monks, which they will lose to in a straight up 1v1 because of their lower number. However, the IKKO IKKI Marathon monks are a support unit above all. You'd only ever want a few of these in your army simply because of their second wind ability, giving nearby units extra stamina. They of course also have the Warcry ability, but so do regular Naginata warrior monks. Next up are the IKKO IKKI Matchlock warrior monks, who can be closely compared to Matchlock Samurai. They have slightly better stats and the increased range ability, guaranteeing you will always get the first shot against units with the same range. Needless to say, even with their ability activated, they have lower range than an archer unit, but guns are generally better against melee units since they ignore armor, so it's nice to be able to fire off a volley slightly earlier. Lastly, we have the Naginata warrior monk cavalry unit, the one and only Naginata cavalry unit in the game. As you'd expect, the Naginata warrior monk cavalry are somewhere in between Yari cavalry and Katana cavalry. However, what you likely wouldn't expect is that they will win the 1v1 against both the Yari cav as well as the Katana cav. They do have higher upkeep costs than both those units because they belong to the warrior monk tier rather than the samurai tier. Lastly, I want to talk about army compositions. As I always say, you want to play to your strengths, and as the IKKO IKKI that means fielding many warrior monk units. In the early game those are of course not available, but in their stead you have Lone Sword Ashigaru, who you will actually be able to use all the way through to the late game if you want. Once they start getting experience they will become nigh unstoppable even against higher tier units. Later in the game you want to start switching out your units for the aforementioned warrior monks. You'll still need a core of armored units, for which I recommend the Yari Ronin over the Katana Ronin, purely because it gives you the anti-cav bonus and the Katana Ronin are just a really bad unit. Flanking the Yari Ronin, you'll want a few units of Naginata warrior monks and Marathon monks, both very strong but susceptible to arrows, which is why you don't want them to be your main line. The rest of your units depend on whether you want to go aggressive or defensive. If you choose to go aggressive, you could recruit a few Naginata warrior monk cav units and perhaps more infantry or a few bull warrior monks to back them up. And if you choose to go defensive, just get a load of Bow Warrior Monks. My personal favourite choice because Bow Warrior Monks are such a devastating unit, especially when used in large quantity. You can of course mix and match some other units in there as well, like the IKKO IKKI Matchlock Warrior Monks and the Naginata Warrior Monk Hero, just to spice things up a little. That is gonna do it for the IKKO IKKI clan overview. Hopefully this video has convinced more of you to try the IKKO IKKI. If you have any more questions, let me know in the comments and I shall do my best to answer them. Also let me know which clan you'd like me to cover next. Thank you very much for watching, hope you've enjoyed, have a good day and goodbye.